Okay, we're sitting right now with Nicholas Kristoff, whose book is A Path Appears, Transforming Lives, Creating Opportunity. First, thanks so much for joining PBS at the Miami Book Fair.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So this book is very inspirational. It's a mix, to me, as I read it, of real-life stories that you can sink your teeth into and be inspired by, and suggestions and guidance. And not only for people who want to give and participate, but for charities and others too. It really felt like a structured approach to the conversation.
Yeah, you know, I think Sheryl and I felt that so many Americans want to go out and make a difference in some way, but feel frustrated that the problems are too vast, that there isn't really a way to make a difference and want to feel confident is actually going to work. And we think, in fact, there are ways we can do that. And so we wanted to offer some ideas and some examples of some incredible people who are doing that right now.
The title, A Path Appears, I love that. I would love for you to explain what
Sure.
it means exactly.
Well, our last book was from a Chinese saying that women hold up half the sky. And so this is also from a Chinese saying by the writer Lu Xun, who said that hope is like a path in the countryside. At first there is nothing, and then because people walk this way again and again, a path appears. And it struck us that a path is now appearing about how one can have an impact on the world through better research, better knowledge about what works. And that indeed part of that pathway is hope, is providing hope.
You know, it's amazing because you've been and you've reported and worked, and your wife Sheryl Wudunn too, has seen some of the worst of what society can do and bring, and some of the worst of what man can do to one another and what nature can do to man. And yet you're talking about hope and about inspiration and about finding hope, and you've been in some of these very dark places. Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, you know, people always they ask this question very gingerly, as if they think I must be deeply traumatized because, you know, I covered genocide and poverty and a lot of grim things. And in that capacity, you see the worst that humanity is capable of. But side by side with the worst of humanity, you invariably see the very best. You see these amazing people doing extraordinary things. You see, you know, the human capacity for courage, for resilience, for strength, for altruism. And that always leaves me with a deeper impression of the human capacity for good that is maybe even greater than the human capacity for evil. So I managed to come back from the worst place to actually feeling pretty good about people.
Well, you know, I think that's a question I have for you. I mean, you've seen these things up close and personal, and of course it's had an effect on you. I mean, it's very emotional in many ways. For a lot of people whose lives revolve around their neighborhoods, it feels very distant. And in fact, there may be even cynicism about some of the things that they read or write about when it comes to charity or giving or,
Sure.
or helping other people in that regard.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is, first of all?
Well, you know, I think there's a bit of an empathy gap. And I mean, it's striking that in the U.S., the wealthiest 20% of Americans donate less to charity as a fraction of their incomes than the poorest 20%. Why is that? It's basically because if you are affluent, you are insulated from need. You live in a nice neighborhood, your friends are reasonably well off, you don't encounter it. If you're poor, then every day you encounter people who truly are needy, and you respond to that, you help. So I think, you know, one of the challenges is to, and one of the things we try to do in A Path Appears, is to remind people that, you know, we have won the lottery of birth, and that when you win the lottery, there's some responsibility that comes with it. And, you know, I think another aspect of that is maybe a failing of journalism that you know, we cover bad news because bad news is usually what is news. We cover planes that crash, not planes that take off. And that leaves people with the impression that all planes are crashing all the time, you know, that all the developing world is in the middle of war or Ebola or whatever it may be. And in fact, the backdrop is a remarkable amount of progress. Since 1990, 100 million kids' lives have been saved through some basic interventions. We know we are getting better at things like global health. And I think that we need to do a better job of conveying that larger truth, or otherwise people just tune out. It just seems depressing and hopeless. And in fact, you know, globally there has been remarkable progress that I have seen in the course of my reporting career.
Yeah, and charities who do some amazing work out there, obviously, and who are changing the world. And yet, you write about in the second half of this book that there's room for reform of the whole charity movement, and that in fact, because charities are sometimes punished for risk-taking, that they're not able to sort of step out and maybe try things that haven't been done before,
Right.
and that inhibits some charities, and you say that there's room for improvement there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think we really need to rethink the way we think about charities, and I think that is happening. You know, we have this sort of bifurcation in our mind where for-profit companies are greedy and evil, and nonprofit, charities are noble and worthy. And obviously, it's way more complicated than that. And what matters at the end of the day is impact. And there are some for-profit models that actually do bring about social change, and there are some nonprofit models that just enrich their CEOs' pockets. And likewise, we tend to have this bifurcation where we take a little bit of money that is our charitable donation, and we want to give that away 100%. We want no return on it. And then we have some we want to invest for our own portfolio, and for that we want no social impact, and we want the highest possible return. And, there should be something in between. We should be able to have to help create a better world, not only in our charitable donations, but also in our purchasing decisions, in our investment. Maybe we will invest in a for-profit company that does some good and accept a slightly lower return. There should be some gradations there, and I think we're going to move to a world in which that is the case.
You say moving to that world. So often you're seeing like younger people now trying to figure out how to be involved. It is intimidating for anyone, but for younger people it seems even larger. And yet there's so many stories in this book that involve young people either who have found ways to give or who are experiencing the benefits of some of these things. And you've talked a little bit about how you need to get to these people, whether they're giving or whether we're helping them at a young age.
Yeah, look, helping people is harder than it looks. And it's not just about good intentions. It's about actually having an impact. And I think one should be upfront about the complexity and the fact that sometimes it doesn't work. On the other hand, I think that one of the basic truisms is that while our efforts to help others have a somewhat mixed record of success, they have this almost perfect record of helping ourselves. And I think young people, kind of get that, and that they want to have an impact, not only because it will indeed make the world a better place, but because it'll also be good for them. And there's no greater selfish pleasure than altruism.
Yeah, you talk about that in the book a little bit about when you write about the neuroscience of compassion and the idea that there's actual studies now, or that you cite in the book, that actually show that that compassion leads to different experiences in the brain.
Yeah, and to longer life, to better health markers, and indeed to greater happiness. I mean, the biblical adage that it's more blessed to give than to receive, it turns out to be backed by modern neuroscience.
That's a question that I'm curious about, because as you mentioned, the United States, for whatever reason, hasn't risen to the level of some other countries in the world in terms of giving. In fact, there's cynicism in various corners, and it's to be understood. I mean, a lot of people's lives they have needs of their own, and there's a lot of pushback on the idea that that our society, now, I'm not talking necessarily about white and black, but I'm talking about Americans in general, have won the lottery, so to speak. Everyone feels like they're aggrieved or they have a tough life. How do you break through that to help those people who may not see it yet, that there's that feeling that you just talked about on the other side of the equation?
I think that goes to this empathy gap, and I think that successful people have, they look in the mirror and they see somebody who, by dint of hard work, studying hard, staying out of trouble, managed to make a success. And they think, I hit a home run, why can't everybody else? And I think it's very easy for those of us who were born on third base to hit home runs and to think, well, why can't everybody else? And not to appreciate how incredibly important it is that one was born to a loving family, that one had books in the house as a child, that one was read to. And in this country, when we can look at a one-year-old child in some zip codes and say, that boy is more likely to end up in prison than in college based on the zip code he was born in, then that is profoundly unjust. And it's not only that child who is victimized as a result, but all of society. The basic aphorism of this century is that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And I think if we can find ways to spread that opportunity and to try to overcome this empathy gap and offer not just pointing fingers, but a helping hand, especially at the beginning of life, then we'll all be better off.
You talk about a lot about helping people in foreign countries, but there's obviously issues here in the United States too.
Right.
There's one story in your book though about a group of kids in Uganda that are don't have anything themselves, and yet they're giving to a charity here in the United States. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about
Sure. Yeah, one of the, I think this goes to just how empowering it is to help others. So these are a group of war orphans in northern Uganda, and they're at a school, a Restore Leadership Academy. And one of the principles of the school is how important it is to try to do service and to help others. And so they decide, so they have a garden and they sell the vegetables and they raise a little bit of money. They managed to raise $22 over some period of months. And they decide they want to help some Americans. So they come across a mentoring program for boys in the US, which appeals to them because they know a lot of boys whose fathers were killed. And they contact this organization in Portland, Oregon, and say, we want to donate our $22 to the organization. And the organization says, we can't accept $22 from war orphans in Uganda. But they explain that this is really important to them, that this is empowering for them. And the organization, it's called the Mentoring Project in Portland, they say, okay, we'll accept it. And both sides are better off as a result.
Mm-hmm. There's so many stories in the book like that I found inspiring and that provide that path that you talked about. There's also a story, though, that was one of the first in the book, the story of Rachel Beckwith, that stuck with me long after the book was done, and that you revisit even later in the book. That there's two parts to that story. Maybe you can help
Sure.
sort of set the explain that story for us.
Yeah, Rachel, an incredible kid, 8-year-old girl in Seattle who's approaching her 9th birthday and hears about how many kids around the world don't have access to clean water. This moves her. She decides to donate her 9th birthday to help other kids get clean water. So she starts a birthday page on Charity Water, the A group, the website, and sets a goal of raising $300 to build wells in Ethiopia. She's then bummed out that she only raises $220, falls short of her target. She then is in a car accident, a bad accident. People in the neighborhood want to help. They want to show solidarity with the family. They think of her page, they go to it, they begin to donate. The amount surges past her goal. Eventually, Rachel dies in the hospital, but the amount raised is $1.2 million. It's a birthday record for Charity Water, and it's enough to raise water to produce water for 30,000 people. I just saw her mom a few weeks ago in Seattle, and there's no way you can solve the pain of losing your 9-year-old child. But for the family, it is both a way of commemorating their incredibly big-hearted child, and also, I think, of just providing an overlay of meaning and purpose to an event that otherwise seemed not just tragic, but just so frustratingly random. And I do think that, in a sense, that's what we all aspire to, that our lives are busy, they're chaotic, and they're just frustratingly random. And if we can find, like Rachel, some cause to connect to, some purpose, that strengthens all of us.
You've seen these stories, these heartbreaking stories, for most of your career. There's been things that you've seen in Darfur and other places. When did you know, as a journalist, that this was something that you were drawn to, that you had this mission and this calling to put yourself in the middle of these situations and be the eyes for people that can't see those things from their home?
My first job at the New York Times was covering international economics and exchange rates. And I would not have predicted that I would be covering these kinds of stories. But once you report on them, they haunt you, and it's very hard to forget about them. I've written a lot about sex trafficking, and that just happened accidentally because way back in, I think, 1996, I went to Cambodia on what I thought was going to be, one story on that issue, and interviewed some young girls who'd been kidnapped and were locked up for the sale of their virginity. And this struck me as exactly like 19th century slavery, except these kids were going to be dead of AIDS by the age of 20. And It's very hard to spend a day with these kids and interview them and get to know them, and then go back to writing about exchange rates. They haunt you. The same with Darfur, the same with disease, poverty, so many of these other issues. The people haunt you, the issues haunt you, and you want to fight back with whatever tool you have. And in my case, my tool is my keyboard.
Well, I'm glad it is. A Path Appears is very inspiring.
Thank you.
The stories are, I think, will provide clarity to a lot of people and help a lot of people, I think, find their own way to that and maybe fill that empathy gap a little bit. But thank you very much for talking to us today and for being here with PBS.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks so much, Nicholas.
Thank you.